Chapter 19. Jonas. My phone had slipped out of my pocket near Alex's bed when I hurriedly tore off my clothes, eager to be with Alex. When I discovered it was too late to go back and get to the galley on time, I headed there to pretend I wanted to work today. How could I work with all that I'd done and what was left on my mind? I had to prepare the menu for the week for my cooks, and check a few other things like, did we have enough food and water to make it to Cancun, and to prevent the crew from consuming everything and we'd arrive in port out of provisions. I couldn't risk that happening. After cutting and pasting an old menu together I'd gotten from a restaurant, I made a quick turn and took the elevator. When I reached her deck, the elevator opened, letting me off across from her suite. I almost rang the bell, but then I heard Christian's voice and realized I didn't see him leave his room. He must have had a secret entrance to her room, no doubt. As he appeared to leave and I no longer heard his voice, I knocked softly on her door. Alex opened it. She must have known it was me. Her red teary eyes grew wide like two saucers, and she trembled from her shoulders down because she had her hands wrapped around her breasts and her hands moved up and down her arms. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping up the pretense. We knew if Christian discovered my identity, we'd be floating in the Gulf of Mexico just about now. "I lost my phone," I said in a calm, neutral voice. Seeing her in a panic, I wanted to hold her in my arms and tell her everything would be all right. I stood at the door as she wandered around searching for my phone, and when she found it, she held it in front of her to keep anyone, especially Christian, from seeing what she was texting into the phone. "Alex, he's dead. Max died in a helicopter crash, and all the men who witnessed me naked is dead too." When Alex ended her text, she handed me the phone, and I took a quick glance and placed it in my pocket. "Thank you, Alex. Thank you for giving me back my life," I murmured. "Don't thank me. You can thank that madman who thinks it's acceptable to sell his wife, parade her like a common whore. Only a common whore wouldn't have put herself in a predicament like this, and this isn't over yet." I noticed the softness in her eyes had gone cold, and now there was a look of hardness. Her face blank. Alex tried to show warmth, her lips trembling, reaching for a smile, but it looked as if she was trying too hard to bring back the warmth, but it never quite made it to her face. In keeping with her attitude about me for the sake of anyone who saw us together, she winked, pushed me, and then slammed the door in my face. Instead of going directly to the galley, I rushed to my room and tried to get in touch with Max if we had reception, which I doubted. Once inside, I turned on the television, but we were out to sea, and I couldn't get any reception yet. Then a text came in from Christian. "What the fuck do you want now?" I grumbled as I read the words. "Christian, come to my room for fun and games in an hour. I want you dressed in your master attire. I'm sure you didn't expect this, but it will be an ultimate experience for me. I want to experience this close and personal, not through a video. I want to be in on the party this time. If you don't, I can have someone fly in. Now you don't want anyone else to taste that sweet body of Alex's now that you've had a taste of her, do you?" No. No. Fuck no. I was afraid of this once Alex married him without consulting me. She wasn't supposed to do this, but I didn't tell Alex why she shouldn't accept any marriage proposal, and for that I blame myself. I sucked in a deep breath and composed myself and exhaled. I can't do this, but if I don't, Christian made it clear he will take this out of my hands, and give this over to someone who might inflict terrible pain on her or worse. As strong as she is, there's no way she can dominate Christian, and some strange man wanting to extract everything possible from Maximilian's ex-wife. When I showered and dressed, I glanced at myself in the mirror. I didn't know how I could live with myself after this, or if Alex was broken. How will I convince Max if he's alive? I didn't have a part in breaking Alex when even he couldn't do it in the years they'd been together. Opening the door, I thought about where I was going, and what had been expected of me, but when I rang the bell to Christian's cabin, I wasn't ready for what I saw. Bound with ropes, a scarf tying her mouth, her arms were behind her back, a collar around her neck with a leather tether, and she'd been on her knees for a while because it appeared when she tried to move they were bruised. This was Max and my beautiful Alex, bound like a hog for slaughter. When she turned to glance up at me, she wore this sad gaze. Her beautiful brown eyes were in tears, and the tears dropped casually onto the floor. All I could do was stare as we locked eyes. I knew Alex well, and her expression said everything, including how much she'd hated that man and loathed herself. She lowered her head. This may have been the first time I'd seen her do that, and it was like a knife to my heart. Don't look at her as if she's a person. He dropped a bowl of water and food on a plate, and if she wanted to eat, she'd have to do as he commanded, because he controlled her actions now. He was now the dominant who controlled her life from this day forward, and if I didn't do something in a hurry, she'd be broken. But what could I do? I'm going to sit here and watch, Christian said, and plopped down on the large sofa, and when his robe fell open, I knew what his kink had been. Or I thought I knew. That's all I want to do, is to watch for now. I want to watch her humiliation, and you're going to serve that purpose, Christian said, his head leaning to the side, his eyes shining in anticipation. There must have been something seriously going on in Christian's head, because he was too young of a man to get off by watching Alex beg. Now I want you to disrobe and walk in front of her and dangle that hard cock of yours as if it's a piece of sausage, and I want her to suck you off, and when you're ready to come, pull your dick out and spray it all over her hair and face. I'll even give you time to get your dick hard enough to penetrate her. I don't know if I can do that, I admitted. Are you saying you can't let her suck you, or you can't fuck her? Remember I said I can bring in someone else, who would be willing to cooperate. I'll pay you anything you want. And Christian palmed his covered cock. It's not right. Look at her, I pointed out. Christian stood and strode over and took the gag out of Alex's mouth. Her eyes begged me to do something. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to do whatever Christian said because she knew, and I knew that anyone else would jump at the chance to be with Alexandra Blackstone, from the cleaning staff to the captain, and knowing Christian, he'd bring in any willing body or dick. I'll do whatever you want, but I have to do it in my own time. Go ahead, I have all night. We don't make land for 2 days, and I planned on enjoying this whatever you do to her, and then after you've gone she'll be ready to comply with whatever I ask of her. I wanted to kill him in that second, but I didn't have a plan, and as a soldier without a plan, someone once said, a goal without a plan is just a wish. I had no plan yet, and all I could do was wish Christian would just die because of what he'd done to my life and Alex's. Chapter 20. Alex. When Jonas had been dismissed, and I was still on the floor because Christian had had enough of me sucking Jonas's cock, and he'd wanted to lie with me after all that, I felt rage coupled with fear. Christian smiled, glanced at me, and then stood over my body as I laid exposed naked on an expensive plush silk oriental rug. Now it's my time. I'm going to sleep with you, my darling, he said, an eerie smile tugging at the right of his closed lips. You're officially mine, and Maximilian will never see you again or take you back if he managed to escape death. Not after you've been used by his brother, and especially by me. Not after he finds out his brother has ravaged you, and I have pictures to prove it. At my request, but nonetheless, he's been inside your body from your mouth to your ass. First, let me untie your hands, he said, loosening each piece of knot on the rope. I want you to place your arms around my neck where we can cuddle together. I choked on my saliva at the thought of him touching me, or cuddling with him in a bed or on the floor. I didn't know how much more I could tolerate without losing my mind. I wanted to lose myself and pretend I was someone else. Are you okay? I don't want you dying on me now, Christian said, then snickered. What did he mean by that? Was I to meet the same endpoint as his other wives? Where he probably dumped them into the deepest waters on his way to Mexico when he'd used them up. That was my fear. I could be gone, and Jonas would never know. Not even my children would know what happened to me. My children, how are they going to live without me? And that's when I decided it would not be me. I will do whatever is necessary to get back to my children. Max could go on without me. He'd done that many times, more times than he'd ghosted everyone with his premature and untimely deaths. He had our children and businesses to keep him sane and occupy his nights and days. But what did I have anymore? After Christian removed the ropes and handcuffs causing me discomfort, he threw off his robe, tossed it across the room, then kneeled down and laid his head in my lap. I want to smell your cunt and suck your breasts the way Jonas did. You must have enticing breasts, he said, fingering my nipple. I hope you don't mind after Jonas fucked you. I glared at him, hardly knowing what to say, but afraid to say anything. Should I take a shower first? I questioned, my head bowed. My breathing staggered, trying to figure out what to do next. If I had time to get away from him, then maybe I could think. I've been going all night and I'm tired. I lost my appetite hours ago when Christian demanded that Jonas's come in my mouth several times before he ordered Jonas to spray it in my hair and on my breasts. It had dried in my hair and on my nipples. No, don't. I want to smell the pleasure and abuse of another man. I could tell by the look on your face you enjoyed him fucking you. Now don't lie. He placed his fingers to my lips and then his hand over my mouth. He pried my lips open and placed his thumb in my mouth and locked eyes with me. I knew what he wanted, and therefore I opened my lips and sucked. He held his cock, jerked it to the rhythm of my sucking. To think he would stop there had been a dream. He had more to torture me with. Yes, I know he's Max's brother. Did you think you two could fool me? He said, slanting his head and grinning. Therefore, if you ever think about leaving me, dear Alex, then I'll have pictures of you, me, and Jonas. If Max... I stopped him when I bit his thumb. He glared at me. There was more to think about than Max. If Max had listened to me and not taken everything from me, including my children, then there wouldn't be this moment where I found myself negotiating with this monstrous man, and not giving a damn what Max thought or did or would do. With that little stunt of biting my thumb, I could have slapped you, but I'm not violent. What about my children? You won't show this to the world for my children to see, will you? My voice screamed with pain of what I'd exposed my children to, and if they ever saw those pictures they could never forgive me, even if they did know the full story. After today, I don't know if I could forgive myself either. I'll make arrangements to bring them to Mexico, nevertheless I'll make this one exception. You can have your children with you. Don't worry, I'll take good care of you and them. Chills rose over my body by what and how he'd said that to me in those few moments. He'll take care of me and my children. What about Jonas now that he'd admitted that he knew all along about him, and was playing the fool at one point? What would he do to him? And Christian placed his palm on my hair and rubbed as if I was his pet. Then he closed his eyes, stretched out on my stomach, and brushed his nose against my pubic hair and sniffed at me like a dog taking in the scent of a bitch. You really should shave again. You have a little stubble there. I might want to enjoy your clit. My skin crawled from his sickening touch and words. I became nauseous at the sound of his voice, but I was helpless to do anything but let him do whatever he desired from me at that moment. At that moment I was happy he didn't want more. But when he leaned up and took hold of my breasts, placed my nipple in his mouth and sucked and bit me, then the other breast he nipped at it and glanced up, and I smiled. He bit my shoulder, placed his finger inside my opening, and I thought I would die. I wanted to die. Then I spotted a small lengths of rope lying on the floor he dropped, and I had a plan. A plan for him. You know, I grew up without a mother, and I always wanted to know what it felt like to suck a nipple, he said with a casual chuckle. I wouldn't trade stories with this horrible creep, but I grew up in a home without a mother too. If I had disclosed that, he'd probably use it against me. Or if he known, he would use that later. Who knew what deceitful things manifested in Christian's mind? I barely spoke when he moved his head down, capturing my nipple full of dry cum and pushing it into his mouth, then sucking it hard, and the pain and abuse continued for what appeared to be hours. I was afraid to say anything that would set him off and make him angry. I mumbled. "Didn't your other wives have breasts?" "When they refused me this little thing, I had their breasts cut off and their hair." "You have such beautiful long dark hair and beautiful breasts, it would be a shame. What are breasts for but to suck?" He smiled and continued squeezing, sucking and fingering my opening. My body shuddered at his touch, and I wondered what next. What next? What next? Leaning up, his hands planted on both sides of my waist, he propped himself and nibbled on my ear and whispered, "You're too lovely to be disfigured. I'd hate to see you without this glorious mane of dark hair, and I love sucking your nipples. I'm so greedy for them, I hope I don't bite one off." Was he fucking serious? I thought. Of course he was. This was the most immoral, deviant man I'd ever met. Robert had nothing over him. I'd come across perverts where men got off from being chained and whipped, choked even, but nothing to compare to him, and I hoped to never see him again. I wished him dead. But wishing never got anyone anywhere or anything. I'd wished I'd had a normal life with Max and my children, but I hadn't come close to any of that. I'd wished Jonas had found him a loving wife, but that wasn't in his past, maybe it would be in his future. But after tonight, when he whispered in my ear, "I love you, Alex," as he'd made love to me and had an orgasm, I knew then I was double fucked. Max's twin declaring his love for me. What could be worse than that? Perhaps that was the only reason I could still maintain my sanity as I watched this man I abhorred and wished dead crawl between my legs, sniff my folds, place his tongue and mouth on my clit, and suck Jonas's cum dripping from my opening. I thought the way Max claimed me was sick and off the charts when it came to deviancy, but I thought nothing of it because I loved him. But I'd never met someone cold, degenerate, and off the chains as Christian had been and is now. I'd married him, hoping I could forget Max and move on. It appeared that every man I'd met had been worse than the next, and Max was one of the good guys now. But where was he? And where is my new love, Jonas? Max had promised to protect me and never leave me, but he left me, and now Jonas is acting as a protector and lover. But where is he now? I need you, Jonas. When I glanced down and thought I'd gotten lucky because he was no longer concentrating on my clit, Christian had eased himself up on my lifeless body, and once again was sucking my nipples, but suddenly he stopped, and his head fell down on my stomach, and when I thought he was headed between my legs once more, he was asleep with his arms wrapped around my cold body. Chapter 21. Alex. If I as so much as moved, wiggled a finger, Christian would be up, and the abuse, the sucking and biting of my nipple would begin once more. He'd said he wouldn't be finished with me until tomorrow, but the sun had set and he'd denied me food. I was hungry, my stomach made these loud noises, and I thought Christian would wake from the growl. Before he'd fallen asleep, he said there were things he wanted to try out on me. What the fuck more could he do to me, I thought. If he was creative and had an insatiable appetite for bondage and inflicting pain, there were a number of things he could do to whet his cravings for sexual deviancy. Perhaps that's what he wanted from me, to teach him things beyond his knowledge of BDSM. Jonas had been my mentor, and thank goodness I didn't have to use what I knew on anyone but Max. If I thought I could crush his balls and bring him to heel without incurring harm to me or Jonas, I would. He'd said to me, "I have some toys I think you'd like." Before he'd fallen asleep, he motioned to his closet hidden behind a large mirror. How does he know what I'd like? I'd like to send him to hell where he belonged. I'd like for Max and Jonas to get rid of him. I'd like to tell them I never wanted to see him again in this life. My heart quaked in my chest, and I was sure he heard it beating loudly and wake from his peaceful dreams, or my nightmare. He'd know what I'd been thinking just from the rumbling of my body, the trembling of my hands, and the terror in my eyes, so I had to be careful and precise. I reached cautiously for the rope he'd discarded near me. I'd seen it earlier. He'd used it to bind my wrists and ankles in place. With one hand slowly, and then the other deliberately, I managed to retrieve the pieces of rope without him waking. Making sure I took my time as not to wake him from his peaceful rest. He could sleep soundly while I hadn't had a good night's rest since I married him. My heart slowed. I closed my eyes, then opened them and peered down without moving a muscle. I wrapped one end around my fingers and made a fist all while he slept. With the other hand I draped the other end around my fingers and made a fist, then I gently ran it across his Adam's apple. I glanced at that man sleeping, and I didn't want to go through with my plan, but I'd come this far and there was no turning back, as they said. I'd crossed the Rubicon. I abandoned taking a deep breath, because I knew I couldn't make an attempt at what I had been thinking without risking it all. I had to be sure I couldn't fail once I made the attempt on his life. If I would be unsuccessful, I'd never see my children again or the men I loved, Max and Jonas. After I'd tied the rope securely in my hands, I slowly eased it around Christian's neck and made a circle. My breathing intensified, and I knew if this was to work, I had to get my emotions under control. I tried breathing out in small spurts. I watched as he slept like a baby, but he wasn't a baby, he was evil. I had him now, I thought. He didn't feel the rope on his skin, and it was now a part of him like a scarf, and there was no way I would let him go. Each end of the rope was inside my fists. I began tightening the rope around his throat. It was then I became fearful I couldn't go through with this or pull this off. I'm not a killer, I thought. My mind was playing with me, and I needed it to be silent. I couldn't go through all of this and then bail. What if he woke and knew my intentions? I had to see this through if I was to survive him. All kinds of thoughts raced through my mind. What if he wakes and overpowers me? Maybe I should wait for Jonas to come looking for me. He said he'd be back to check on me. What if I do this? Could I live with the thought I'd killed someone, even if it was Christian? Yes. I would find a way to live with myself. I would go on. Max wouldn't blame me for what I'm about to do, but Jonas, I didn't know about Jonas. He'd seen too much death. Do I tell him? I questioned. I had to, because there was no way I could get rid of Christian's body alone. In my mind, I had killed him, and that wasn't reality. The reality was he's sleeping, and I need to do something quick. Who does something like that to a woman and falls asleep? I had my answer. An arrogant, evil man looking to die. I will grant him his wish if I'm successful. I have to be, because there is no turning back for me now. Christian stirred, and I thought everything was over, but he reached for my breasts in his sleep, and with one glance thinking about what I'd been through with him, I narrowed my eyes and began tightening the rope around his throat. All of a sudden his eyes opened, and he realized what was happening to him. He reached for my hair and began pulling it. I tightened my grip on the rope and pulled it as well. Then he thrashed about, kicking and trying to open his mouth to scream. He released my hair, then he used his hands to insert his fingers between the rope and his throat. His eyes protruded, his glare became intense. I pulled harder and his eyes grew red and he opened his mouth to beg me. When that didn't work, he managed to get one hand out of the rope surrounding his neck because he needed it. I pulled tighter and he grabbed my leg with his free hand. He pounded on it with his fist, but I wouldn't release my grip on the rope. He scratched my arms, clutching it, and tried to curse at me as he began to lose the battle, but I pulled it tighter and tighter until he couldn't speak. With the last ounce of his breath and strength, he dropped the other hand that had prevented me from giving him a quick death. With his hands he reached and grabbed my shoulder and twisted around, bringing me over him where he was on his stomach and I was on his back, but I wouldn't release my death grip on him. What he did in his last futile effort of life was give me a better advantage because he was now face down, and I was sitting on his back. I pulled his neck back and planted my knee on his spine and pulled as hard as I could until he slumped to the floor and stopped moving, and still I couldn't let go of the rope for fear he'd somehow wake from the dead. Then he flipped over, and he was trying to breathe, but I wouldn't let go of the rope as he was losing consciousness. His face had turned blue when his hands no longer moved, and I didn't let up on my grip. I pulled and pulled, cried and pulled until his body slumped on the floor and there was no more movement. When I thought it was over, I passed out. When I heard Christian breathe his last breath, and there was so much silence and I could no longer hear the waves of the sea, I laid on his back naked, my hands gripping the rope, afraid that he'd wake from the dead. Afraid that the only thing that would kill him would be a stake in his heart. I had no stake. It was then Jonas opened the door and entered the room. I raised my feeble head, rolled off Christian, laid on my back and looked up at him. He hadn't seen the true picture. I didn't mean to interrupt. What the fuck, Jonas? Why are you so fucking polite? And can't you see that Christian is dead? I'm not playing games with him now. Jonas's steps were measured because he knew this wasn't natural. He stepped around to see Christian's eyes open, his mouth open and foam spilling out on his expensive rug. What the fuck, Alex? What happened? I killed a man. No. I killed a monster. Jonas rushed to the chair and found my robe and threw it over me, then he gathered me in his arms and laid me on the bed. I want to go to my room, Jonas, I pleaded. He turned and glanced around as if he thought there were cameras, and there may have been, with all the talk of videos that could get back to Max and my children. Sitting up and moving over to the chair near the bed, Jonas sat at my feet. Take your time and tell me what happened. Did he do something unspeakable to you that would make you want to do this? Wasn't it enough he walked me in front of men, sold me to the highest bidder even if it was you? You just happened to be the one who bought me. My voice shaky, but I couldn't cry anymore. So much had happened to me, I was all out of tears. I need to be in my room. I can't be here with his body. You'll have to wait, Alex, until I can dump the body overboard. It will have to be in the Gulf of Mexico near the Bay of Campeche, then we can turn and go to Cancun or Brownsville, Texas. There are deep waters there, and chances are they will never find him, but first we have to get our story straight, because when we arrive in Cancun we have more questions from the authorities. I heard my heart beating loud, and I'd forgotten I was naked, and my eyes focused on Jonas while his focus fell on my breasts. I watched as he cupped his covered cock and his chest heaved up and down. Not now, for Christ's sake, Jonas. I stared at Jonas because his eyes said too much, and my mind thought too little about the problems that lay ahead of us. I hadn't thought this out. No, I didn't, because it's hard to think when you find you hate someone more than you value your life. At this moment my hatred had taken over, and it was consuming me. And then it was the problem of falling in love with Jonas that had colored everything in my life. I dread this day, but I knew it was coming, and I knew Jonas felt the same way I did. And therein laid our greatest dilemma. How would it be possible to love two men who are brothers? Could I have a built-in excuse? Could I tell Max it was all his fault, which it was? But what about my children? They were old enough now to know that something different had occurred between me and Jonas. There would be no way we both could hide how we felt about each other. We had shared something private and life-changing for the both of us, and we couldn't go back to the casual relationship we'd shared before of brother and sister-in-law. What the fuck was I to do? Lately, I'd been swearing more and needed a drink as my life swirled out of control. I need a drink, Jonas. Jonas marched to Christian's liquor cabinet and poured me a glass of vodka straight. He took a sip before handing it to me. I didn't hate Max because I loved him, but he was the reason all this had happened. From the first time I'd met him and Jonas, I was destined to walk down this road, and here I am. I should have run away, but I ran to Maximilian and Jonas Blackstone, with their sexual psychotic deviancy that drew me to them. I had been all fucked up from the start, otherwise I never would have found myself here, I thought, as I looked down at the corpse of Christian staring up at me. I took another gulp of the liquor as it burned my throat. Jonas stood up after checking Christian and walked to the door, opened it carefully and peeped outside. When he heard two crewmen talking outside, he closed the door and slammed it. Where is the hidden passage to your room? I pointed because I didn't have the strength to talk anymore. The liquor hadn't started working yet, so I took another swallow. I have to supervise the serving of food and bring you something to eat. You're going to need your energy. I have to act as if nothing is unusual. I'll tell the captain Christian is sick, and he'll take soup, and you and Christian are indisposed and will want all your meals delivered in the staterooms by me. From what I hear from the crew, there's nothing unusual about him holed up inside his stateroom for days and sometimes weeks. I don't know what will happen in Cancun, but we'll have to figure out something when the authorities question us. Or we could end up in a Mexican jail for the rest of our lives. I glared at Jonas, my mouth turned downward, biting back tears. Now was no time to cry. I had just killed a man with my own hands, and here tears were welling. Oh no, I had to see this through, because if I fell apart, then everything in my life would be over. The stillness of Jonas as his eyes covered me from head to feet, it was then I recognized his true passion, longing and immediacy just by the way he looked at me. I threw off the short robe and covered my body with a sheet. I knew Jonas was ready to do something stupid like take the blame. Lately we had been close to each other, and talking with me without clothes felt like the norm, but it wasn't normal. To be in his arms for him to comfort me wasn't normal. I needed to be comforted, but I couldn't accept it from him, not today. Maybe never. I can't stay in here with him, I finally broke and tears streamed down my cheeks. You will have to for a while. Jonas reached for me and wrapped me in his arms and close to him. He glanced down at me and I met his eyes. He leaned and captured my lips in a warm, passionate kiss as his tongue slashed through my waiting mouth. Jonas held me tight. He placed his hand behind my neck and pulled away from the heated kiss, and my mouth and body felt the absence of his warmth. However, he kissed my neck, my shoulder, and then he took my hard, protruding nipple into his mouth as my body responded to him, forgetting I was in love with Max and now I'd fallen in love with Jonas. This had to be the worst thing to happen to us in my life, but then I glanced down and I realized it wasn't. Jonas stooped down to retrieve the sheet that had fallen at my feet, and his mouth landed on my pubic area. He went to his knees and his warm mouth encircled my folds, and then his wet tongue hit my clit. I grabbed his silky dark curls and pulled his face closer to rest on my mound, as Jonas used his tongue to bring me into his sexual life. He licked and sucked until I stiffened, and he knew I was ready to reach my orgasm. He pulled away and looked up at me. Alex, come for me. I know it's a lot to ask, and I shouldn't be here except to comfort you, but I've always loved you. Before, I never wanted to admit to you how I've longed for you, and for this day. He placed his mouth covering my clit, and then his tongue as I opened my folds. He wrapped his arms around my butt. He used his tongue, and I had to muffle my screams of pleasure and ecstasy. It was something about being upset, nervous, and just plain scared out of my mind that made me want to have an orgasm, and I did as Jonas moaned and groaned with pleasure as he held my ass when I came. He pulled away and stood in silence, waiting for me to acknowledge him as the man I loved above all others. Now it was him who I would tell I loved and never wanted to be without. When he thought he'd waited long enough and got no response from me, he said, "I'll place the body in one of Christian's hidden walls until we get to where I can dump it. But I have to leave him here and get you some food." Jonas's long legs headed for the door, but before he opened it, I did acknowledge him. "Jonas, we have been through so much together. I love you, Jonas. As much as I love Max." Jonas smiled and his eyes brightened. "I've always wanted to hear that from you. And now I know you mean it. Not as a brother, but as much more. I'll do anything for you." And he opened and closed the door.